Today's conversation is being live streamed to Give an Hour's YouTube channel. Over the next hour, we will be talking to an amazing group of survivors and experts about the journey of recovering from sexual trauma. Brave survivors will share their powerful message of hope, while experts share critical elements of healing and resources for your own journey. Our hope is that this discussion inspires you to unmask your own hope. Before I hand the discussion to our moderator, I'd like to go over a few helpful pointers about interacting in today's webinar. During today's conversation, the chat and question and answer feature are enabled. Please use the chat feature for any administrative or technical questions and use the Q&A feature to ask questions of the panelists. If we do not have the opportunity to get an answer to your question today, we will follow up with an email. We will be posting a few polls throughout the webinar. The answers will be anonymous, so please participate if you feel comfortable. Participants, will you please turn on your videos? While they do that, let me introduce our moderator for today. Dr. Dwayne L. Buckingham is a licensed clinical psychotherapist, retired decorated veteran, and CEO of Buckingham Consulting Group, LLC. As a highly acclaimed international clinical psychotherapist, he has provided psychological assessments and treatment to over 40,000 individuals, couples, groups, and families worldwide. Through consulting, counseling, coaching, and training, he enables individuals and organizations to find solutions in problems and produce sustainable results. Dr. Buckingham has authored 14 self-help books, produced 4 documentaries, and is affectionately known as the Empathy and Resilience Doctor. His clinical experience in military training enables him to serve individuals from all walks of life and consult with organizations with very diverse staff and customers. Thank you, Dr. Buckingham, for moderating today's conversation. The floor is now yours.
I'd like to say thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And I'd like to say thanks to Give an Hour too for having the vision to bring this to the world. I think it's really important for us to talk about, this really important topic so that we can begin to help people heal. So I'm excited to be here. I'd like to again thank all of the Give an Hour leadership and you as well as Nikki for having me. So with all due respect to time, I actually would like to have our panelists, begin to introduce themselves. And so that we can actually talk about what unmasking is and why it's important for all of us to be here today and to pour out our hearts and our minds and our souls so that we can make a difference in the world. So I'd like to bring on the panelists, and I'd like to start off with Eric. If you wouldn't mind, please sharing a little bit about who you are with everyone who's watching and around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Buckingham. My name is Eric Christensen, and I'm an individual in recovery. I started this journey, over 30 years ago when my home burned down in the Painted Cave fire disaster in Santa Barbara, and I got clean and sober. And then I did my first documentary called Faces in the Fire about the recovery after that fire. And I got together with a group of other survivors and put this film together. And that was the first of, now I'm on my 4th film. That was the beginning of my calling in this field of grief and trauma recovery. And currently I'm working on a film called Unmasking Hope. And it has very diverse group of survivors from 9/11 to mass shootings, to sexual trauma and sexual assault, and first responders. And it truly is my calling. I'm not crazy about being called a filmmaker. I like to be called more of a messenger and an instigator of healing. So It's great to be here, and thank you. And it's great to see the panelists. This is a really exciting thing. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing with us. Instigator of healing. I am not going to let these bypass, right? That was powerful, Eric, in that you didn't show up to do what you did, but you stepped right into it and you embraced it, and you're sending a message through production. So thank you for being here. and being an instigator of healing. We all need that. So thank you. So Matthew, would you please, introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Buckingham. Honored to be here to share this time and space with you. I'm not Anthony Edwards, but in his absence due to an emergency, glad I could step in. My name is Matthew Ennis. I have really the privilege of serving as the president, CEO of 1in6.org, an organization dedicated to working with male survivors of sexual abuse and assault. And I'm a childhood survivor of sexual abuse myself, but most importantly, what I would want you to know about me, in addition to those things, is I'm a father, a husband, a brother, a son, a friend. And so while that is my work, and it's certainly part of who I am, while I am a survivor and I'm very open and proud about that, all those other things are so important to me as well. So I wanted to mention those.
Wow. So you all are in for a treat. I mean, Matt, look at this. You've already started us on this path to say, you know what? I've had some things happen to me, but I have so many other aspects of my life that is so promising. I'm a father, I'm a brother, we're on a good start already. Thank you for that. That's really important as we move forward. Miss Sandra, please share with us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Sandra Lee. I'm a U.S. Army Iraqi War combat veteran, PTSD sufferer, MST survivor. For those who don't know what MST is, it's military sexual trauma. I am also an actor, yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, and you're one of the star members in the production, right? You're one of the, yeah.
Yes. So I actually met Eric when he was doing his last film, the Searching for Home.
Okay.
And I was as part of that, and I believe that was all about veterans returning home and finding their place again in the world. And then, yes, I am also in the current one, the Unmasking Hope as well.
Okay, well, thank you for your service and truly appreciate you. And also thank you for acting, because now you're, using, I believe, that talent as well to probably, reach people. So thank you for that. Dr. Lyman, you're the last one up. How are you today? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for allowing me to be here to share what I believe is a long needed conversation, especially in communities of color, especially for men of color. Dr. Lyman Montgomery, I am a single dad of a 19-year-old who is an entrepreneur like his father. I travel all over the world. Matter of fact, tomorrow I leave for India for 4 states, spreading what I consider to be a message of hope as well as a message of healing to people around the world. I am a childhood sexual survivor that lasted 3 years that sent me down a downward spiral. And I'll talk a little bit later about that process of unmasking and coming back to not just surviving, but also thriving despite what had happened. I always believe that what happens to you does not define your destiny. It is only a starting point of a launching pad to launch you into your future. And so I talk more about that, but I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm also in the film Unmasking Hope.
All right. So I'm just going to jump right into this because I'm excited now. I mean, I think everybody is in for a treat. I think these topics, to your point, Dr. Lyman, sometimes it's difficult for us to have these conversations, but it's really important that we do have these conversations, because those who suffer in silence, I don't think that anyone should have to be in that position. And sometimes these kind of conversations give voice to those who appear but may think that they're voiceless. So I think each and every one of you, and again, given our for showing up so that we can give people a voice to discuss this. I have a question I'd like to start off with each one of the panelists. Each one of you can actually just share your thoughts about the question. And the first question is really, what is unmasking? As we're talking about, unmasking and sexual assault, what is that and what does it look like? If we wouldn't mind sharing from your perspective. Eric, you want to start with the production and what inspired you to
I'll jump right in there. Thank you. It's a great title. No, no, Unmasking Hope. And the unmasking in the context of the film is clinically, they call it personas. And people put on personas. And in particular, when you went through a severe trauma, that you put on a persona. I'm fine, everything's great. Or you get into this workaholic thing, or you get into drugs and alcohol, or there's so many different personas that you can put on. We call it a mask. And and actually here's an interesting part about this is these masks actually have a purpose. They help us survive a certain period of our life. Imagine having went through a severe trauma and then being a mother or a father and then having to get up in the morning and just make their sandwiches and get them out to school. You're going to have to put on that dad mask, get yourself out of bed, get it done, and then get that. So that's a functioning part that works pretty well. The problem is when that mask gets stuck and then we start to hide behind that mask, it goes beyond its usefulness. We don't shed it anymore. We don't come out of that mask. And so it becomes an impediment to growth and all sorts of things. And it becomes an impediment to healing is what happens. And we get stuck behind that mask. And then we find that spark or whatever it is, and we can talk about that later, that starts the healing, and the masks start to melt away. And I like to say you kind of return to where you were, but like Lyman mentioned, sometimes we just don't return to where we were. We come out a little bit better. Okay. And we grow through that. And by losing that mask, we can start to interact with the world again and become who we were meant to be. And so that's how I really kind of see it in the context of my film.
No, I like that. I mean, you said quite a bit. I think that the audience can take from the power of the mask in terms of, for some people, it's a protection factor, protects them. But to your point, at some point, that mask has to come off or will come off. And it needs to come off if we're going to start, do some healing. So Lyman, what are your, what could you add to what Eric just shared, if you don't mind?
Sure. In my first book, Shattered Masks, I talk about 7 masks that I wore in the process of shattering them. And the problem with masks is it's great from a survival standpoint. I use the example of scuba diving. In the right place, if I'm in the ocean, I have a scuba mask on, it's for protection. But it may not be comfortable if I'm in the desert walking around with scuba gear on. I need to figure out a way to take that mask off. And so in my book, I talk about 7 masks that we wear. And the problem with masks, we have a propensity to keep adding masks until we become suffocated. And that's what happened to me. I was suffocating under the weight of all these masks to where I looked in the mirror. I didn't know who I was, because depending on the audience or depending on the environment, I had become someone other than who Lyman Montgomery was. And so to me, unmasking is the process of taking off the mask. And in my case, I had to shatter the mask because I knew if I just took it off, I'd find myself trying to pick it up again. So for me, unmasking is really about the process of shattering these masks so that I can breathe. Okay. And to me, that's what unmasking is, of being able to breathe and be comfortable in your own skin.
Wow. I thank you for that. And multiple masks was your point, though. It's not just one. I think you highlighted that depending on the circumstance or situation, we select a mask that we need to kind of put on. And I learned, and I think that's what we do to learn how to adjust, right? I think that was with the adjustment, and it can become a skill that you hone, and although it may be unhealthy. So thank you for that. Ms. Sandra, again, you're in it and you're a star role player in this. So please share your thoughts about unmasking.
I mean, it's essentially about kind of similar to what Eric and Lyman said. To me, it's the shedding of the multitude of the layers of protection, the layers of anger, layers of self-hatred, layers of depression, and also the layers of seeming to be happy as well, because that's also, a mask. And and by shedding, even just little bits of the layers at a time, it's allowing yourself to open up and receive healing, whether it's, even if there's like a little crack, a little fissure, that's where it can seep in. And the more cracks and more fissures happen, the more healing can be received, and there's more light at the end of the tunnel, where you felt like you were just in a dark room, enclosed room, where you could never escape.
Yes.
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. You're speaking my language as a mental health professional, Sandra. You went right in. You're not cutting. You're getting right to the trace. You mentioned words that resonates with me, and I think we really just have to, speak to is beneath the mask, self-hatred, depression. So we understand those things from a mental health profession. From a mental health perspective, is clearly important to address. We know why we wear the mask, but what's beneath that mask, we have to really get at that. So I thank you for even using those words, because sometimes it's hard for us to mention that when we have certain amounts of assaults or trauma, self-hatred or depression. And it's important. Thank you for putting it out there, because I'm going to come back to that to discuss that and have you all share a little bit more about the mental health aspects of what unmasking was like for you. So thank you for opening up that. Matt, your thought about unmasking.
Yeah. First, my soul sings that we're having this conversation. We're just a few minutes in, and hallelujah that we can have this conversation. Unmasking for me, I think, over 20 years of a career working, I've had a lot of thoughts about unmasking, but recently in the last few years, I think I began to look at unmasking a little bit differently. And so society, I think, in my experience and the experience of those around me who have shared, there's been a lot of opportunity for individuals to say, just take that off. You don't have to wear that mask, put it aside. And as a survivor, I know how isolating these masks that we put on can be. And so for me, as I think about unmasking, I think about the last 2 years. And my hope is that society, those who are not survivors, who have these expectations that we would just take this off and set it to the side, that we would be able to openly share our truth without any worries of what would come after it. My hope is that society now, because we have all, as a world, not as a country, not as an individual group, but as a world, we have felt what true isolation feels like. And so my hope is that as a society, we will have a better understanding of those who have experienced trauma and who isolate and hide behind these masks, a better understanding that we don't always choose to do that. In the beginning, certainly, it's a survival technique. We have to do it to survive. Yes. And we need the time and space for healing to feel comfortable taking those masks off and setting them to the side, no matter how many of them we have on or the weight that we're carrying. It's a challenge to do that. I hope we have a better understanding of that as a people now.
Yes, and you're saying that this conversation is make you feel good on a deeper level. And I agree with you, Matt, because this conversation is the gateway to helping individuals understand exactly what you just said, is that it's not easy. And so again, I want to commend each and every one of you, because it is not easy. And I think in society, we have to be able to do our part, meaning those who may not, and monitor the expectations and the beliefs about this work. So, thank you for that. And I would like to open up some additional questions, but I also like to include, Eric, what you're talking about. I love this concept about unmasking and why you did it. I actually teach in therapy. We have 3 options the way that I see it in life. And we either hide, we heal, we hide, we hurt, we hide, and we heal. And so those are the 3 things I think happens, is that when we hurt, we're either going to hide or we're going to heal. We had a choice. And I think, unmasking is about promoting healing. It's about that, because we cannot hide behind the hurt and be healthy. We have to take off those masks and begin to heal. So with that being the thing, Eric, I'd just like to ask you again, you said, one of your talking points, I think, as you talk about this is always hope and healing, and there is other people like you. Could you speak to what that is for you? What does it mean?
I'd like to put it in a personal context. and kind of just reveal a little bit. I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And it's funny because we talk about the fire and the whole thing, but that was one small point, is really the hell I put myself through and the trauma I put myself through with drugs and alcohol and my recovery there. So flashing to this hope and finding hope and how hope works, I need to see somebody else. So after this, after this webinar, I'm literally going to a meeting with a bunch of other recovering people. And I'm going to look at each one and I'm going to hear their story. We all share. Yes. And then through that, I'm going to be inspired and aspire because somebody else has actually walked down that path before me. Yes. And I need to see that, because we're talking about isolation. When you're in isolation, that's the toughest part when you're in any sort of recovery, from trauma, from drugs and alcohol, from anything, because you don't have other examples. We need to do this as a community. And those people that have went before us are very, very important. Yeah. Because then you can see, oh, they walked this path. There's a way out for me, and I'm not crazy. I'm not alone, and there's a way out. And that's kind of how my films function. 75% of the film is about finding healing and then finding the hope. And for me, and in my films, my definition of hope is when you get to a certain point of healing, you go back to the people at the very beginning and you can help them. Yes. And so it's all about community and being able to see other people to inspire you. And so this whole pandemic and everything has been very difficult on the recovery communities, because Zooms are great, but there's nothing better than being in the room and getting a hug and seeing somebody else that went before. Yes. And being able to go, wow, can you talk to me for a second? Because I'm feeling a little bit crazy. And they go, oh yeah. And then you're like, oh, you've done that and you felt that way too. Yes.
Eric, you're gonna, here's the deal too, in being vulnerable. I think I love this conversation because I think part of the healing is being vulnerable. I'm feeling very vulnerable in just what you said, that it's okay to have support, to be part of a community, and it's needed, a part of the journey. So I'm feeling like full, as they would say. My cup is being filled up and we're just getting into this. So Sandra, you had a point, and you said that as a woman, often sometimes we tend to get blamed for the way that we act or we dress or kind of things. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that for our female who's also in, experiencing this, please?
It's the truth though, right? It's often blamed on the female, even as a young girl. You can't wear provocative clothing, or what's provocative, right? Okay, your midriff is showing, or your skirt is too short, or you're giving off the wrong message. And I think from an early age, females are taught that, if you don't behave and if you don't dress a certain way, these bad things could happen to you. And they happen to you because other people choose to do those things. It's not your fault. You're not forcing somebody to assault you or to be aggressive or abusive. And it's not just about female empowerment but it is about taking back power. It's an equal thing. It's not one sex is greater than the other. We all have our different attributes, and just as individual people. But for women especially, and especially in the military, or let's say even like a college dorm setting, you go to a frat party, let's say, oh well, she was asking for it. I could tell. Look at the way she's dressed. It's the same thing, and in the military too, especially because women are the smaller number in the population. we have to look out for ourselves, but then at the same time, it can be a difficult arena because you have all these sharks swimming around you, and we're such few numbers, and it's not necessarily that we'll group together and help each other out either, because we're also in survival mode at the same time.
Yes. So I like that, Sandra, that, you said it's not about the power, but it is. It's about, owning, and understanding the power from within, and not necessarily. So I think that's a good message. I think that hopefully individuals receive that it's a, an equal amount of a power between men and women, and your power lies within you being in control of the power from within. And understanding that. And thank you for that and sharing it. I think it is hard in the military environment as someone who's, served for 22 years, to your point, to have a voice when you're the minority, and, so thank you again for now, sharing, that part. And I'll actually want to have you answer a little bit more about another question. But Lyman, you also in this space, one of your coaches, I so thought it could just be good to just open up and share your experience. You said your journey lasted for about 8 years. Is that why, if you can speak to the process of what unmasking and why so long?
Sure. First of all, understand the detriment of mask. I believe what I call the 3 C's. Number one, masks conceal who we are and what we can be because we hide behind the mask. The second C is it creates conflict between who we are and who others see us. I thought he was this. Well, I thought it was, who is this guy? So it creates this internal conflict. And the third thing is that it condemns us. Going back to what's saying, oh, well, this self-hatred of, well, maybe I did something, maybe if I wouldn't have gone to the party, or maybe I wouldn't have wore that, or you know what, my mama told me, man, or society told me. So the detriment of these masks that creates this concealment, I don't want anyone to know. There's a saying in the African-American community and probably in other communities, what goes on in the house, what? Stays in the house. The problem is the house is on fire, okay? And we're walking around suffering. I think you mentioned earlier, Dr. Dwayne, we're suffering in silence. And so the reason it took so long is that I was so afraid that if people, especially my family, my friends, my colleagues, if they knew what had really happened to me, that they would abandon me, that they would ask me, well, are you gay? Did you, something ain't seeming right here. Especially, I think it's okay if sexual abuse occurs with, let's say, children under 10, they say, but when you're like 9, 10 in the double digits, there's the perception, well, come on now, you must have done something. And the truth of the matter is nothing. It was a long grooming process before the sexual trauma actually started, over 3 years to be exact. This person whom I call the mask maker was the president of the neighborhood watch. He was my homeroom teacher. He was the scout leader. He was well known in the community. And so I'm saying, who's going to believe me against this person? Who am I? And that's why it took so long. It was that self-blame, the shame, feeling that if I told the truth, that I would not be believed. And then there was a part of me that somehow was convinced, absolutely convinced, that I had done something wrong. And it took a long process to say, I did nothing wrong. I didn't ask for this. Why am I blaming myself? So that's why it took so long.
Okay, thank you for that. And so I think Sandra was alluding to that as well when she was speaking to how, women are, I would say, socialized to how if you dress, you're giving people permission. And so what I got from that you just spoke to as well is blame.
Yes.
I think there's the internal blame, unfortunately, that is there. And then the self-blame, and then societal blame, which is what Eric is really trying to combat. Like, we should not be pointing a finger at those who've been victimized. And I think that's what if I'm, I don't want to speak, but I'm hoping, Eric, I'm understanding what part of this production is about, as you mentioned, the community and reaching society. So thank you both for that too. So those who are listening, this concept of blame, I think is part of what's beneath the mask. And we want you to be able to hear that and begin to process and heal from this if you're having a struggle with blame. So thanks both Sandra and Dr. Lyman. Matthew, would you mind sharing a little bit about Anthony? I think he wrote an article, I think recently, and it had some value, I think, to the discussion. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. I want to share this thought first, if I can, is if you all are familiar with Denim Day, which is coming up next week with a rally in Los Angeles, but events across the globe. And Patty Giggins, who is the founder of that, a brilliant hero in my mind, she has a saying, which I believe you can purchase on pins and buttons and T-shirts. But it is this, and it's simple in nature, but so true, is there is never an invitation or an excuse to rape or abuse. And I just continued to think of that as I was listening to you all share your thoughts. In 2017, Anthony Edwards released this article on Medium. If you can see, it's titled, "Yes, Mom, There Is Something Wrong." And I would encourage you to visit Medium and read that. Anthony couldn't be here with us today, but I know he's here in spirit. And that article is so very powerful. That is the moment where he disclosed his abuse publicly that occurred to him as a young boy. But I wanted to share this one thought, and it's the very last sentence of the piece that I'd like to read to you. Tony shared, "I did not go from being a victim to a survivor alone. No one does. I had to ask for help, and I'm so grateful that I did." And his journey it has just been amazing to me. He surrounded himself by survivors, and Eric, just as you alluded to, and everyone within the group during this conversation, the power of having those around you who understand your shared lived experience is so very integral to the healing process. And not only has Tony seen that himself, Anthony has helped so many individuals as he shared his experience and his journey as well.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, he's here with us in spirit, so we wanted to, share that with everyone. So thank you, Matthew. So Eric, the man of the hour with the production. I've actually done 4 documentaries myself, so I understand the power of production. So I have a question for you. The second question is, what kind of work have you done to kind of like heal and to recover? And I think one of the things you had mentioned about like sexual trauma, if you can speak to this, that it fits into the trauma healing cycle, the same as other traumas and mental injury as well as a night. So if you can speak to that a little bit.
Again, I'm going to kind of frame it in a very personal way is, that's been my biggest gift, is the fact that I came out as a drug addict and alcoholic foremost. And then I got into recovery. And so I understand that process for me, and I understand what it takes. It's a constant thing. So when I was first exposed to like the veterans community, when I did my film After Faces in the Fire about surviving a disaster, I did a film called Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. And I was exposed to the veterans and the combat trauma and PTSD. And I was floored because I understood the process. And I'm like, it was truly a gift that I could connect with it and then be able to tell the story on for me, it's very personal. And I could reach out and connect with those survivors. And now flash forward to Unmasking Hope, that has so many varied survivors, including sexual trauma and sexual assault, that I see so many similarities in just the overall arc of the healing. But it's a very different situation or case, I guess you would say. And so are the modalities of healing. But there's this overall arc, and I'm a very spiritual man. I like to say God has put this kind of healing mechanism into us, much like when you get a scratch or a scrape, it heals over and you have a scab, and then if you leave it alone, it's going to heal.
Yeah.
And I do believe we're born with an innate ability to overcome these traumas. It's the problem with society, with all sorts of other things that come at us that build blocks to that, and we get stuck for various reasons, and then it festers, and we start to have more manifestations of mental problems and things like that in that process.
Yeah.
And but I see the sexual trauma is very similar to a 9/11 survivor, of what they've went through and what they need to go through, and that constant vigilance and acceptance that comes after that situation. And I love this. Dr. Catherine Shear from Columbia University, she's a grief expert that's in the film, and she talks about integrating the grief into your life, it becoming part of your story. Dr. Amit Etkin out of Stanford University talks about like how trauma is an interruption in our narrative. We have a life narrative, and it's a big interruption. Sexual trauma is a big interruption, but then we have to go back and incorporate that sexual trauma, the sexual assault or the trauma, into our lives, and then let it become part of our narrative. It is part of my story. We don't try to block it off or say it didn't happen or try to lessen it. It becomes part of our story, and when it gets woven into our own fabric, then the healing starts to come. And I love that. I just love it. We have to rebuild our narrative.
Yes.
And
yes.
I see that's what everybody's doing in this film, from 9/11 survivors, mass shooting survivors, and sexual trauma survivors. They're rebuilding their narrative and building, and this is who I am. And in the process of rebuilding that narrative, the masks come off.
Yes.
And so pretty darn cool.
It is pretty darn
beautiful.
Cool. That's pretty darn cool. I mean, you said a lot. And so people, I'm hoping they're taking notes or something, but here's the deal. I mean, here's some key takeaways. Is I love what you said about we have this innate ability to heal. I truly believe that, as someone who experienced a lot of, childhood trauma, coming from extreme poverty and whatnot. And I stand before you all today as Dr. Buckingham. So I truly believe that. And, we have to help people get to that space. So again, Eric, I thank you for that. Sandra, I want to ask you the same question, in terms of what kind of work have you done to kind of heal, personally?
Okay, so I'm going to rewind a little bit back to 2004. Is at the end of 2004 is when I came back from Iraq. And not only did I have the military sexual trauma, but I had just PTSD in general from being in combat. And, because it was so early on in the war that I was deployed, that I had to do a lot of things that just you don't have to do in real life, let's just say, but you do have to do in an extreme war situation. And when I came back, I was in a rage. All I saw was red. And I didn't know how to, well, first of all, I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know what I was. I was just, it was me returning home, trying to get back into my life. I was going back to university, trying to finish that up. And I think someone had mentioned before, one of the mechanisms that you try to do in order to survive is just inundate yourself with things to do, to make yourself so extremely busy and that's what I did. I didn't have time to think about anything else. I had tasks, I had homework, I had exams, I had, my goal to finishing my degree. And that's what I did. I threw myself into work. But then you go into these quiet moments when all of a sudden you're sitting there, and it hits you like a shot to the face. And it's not even like sinking into this deep, dark well. You're at the bottom and you don't know how you got there. And so from there, it took until like 2007. So, almost 3 years someone had recognized, and I was still in the military at that time, a couple of female officers recognized that, hey, you know, like Sergeant Lee, she needs to go see somebody. She needs some help. And they helped fast track me into a program at the National Center for PTSD in Menlo Park, California. At the time I was living in Hawaii. And so they flew me out there. I spent 6 months there, where we did all different kinds of therapies. Medication, of course, was the biggest one. At one point I had 14 different things that I was taking every day, which made me feel like a zombie, by the way. You know, we did CBT, DBT, one-on-one therapy, group therapy, yoga, meditation. And at the time, I wasn't ready for those things. And yes, I learned little bits of each modality of different kinds of therapies you could do and utilize in your own life, but I wasn't ready to receive any of that. And so it helped in a way, but as far as my journey, it didn't start there, really. I was just retaining information and facts of what I could do had I been in a place of where I could receive healing. And for me, I know, like, well, as Dr. Lyman and others have said, that, you know, being surrounded by others who have gone through similar traumas is helpful. For me, I didn't find that, unfortunately. It was being able to speak about my experience, I think, helped others, and I heard a lot of feedback in that sense. But I think for me, I was still almost kind of like in denial too, that it happened to me. And it was kind of I guess, you know, you could say that I was still wearing a mask at that point. So it wasn't what I needed. Well, what I ultimately found going through art therapy, music therapy, equine therapy, which I'm a big proponent for, actually. Equine therapy is tremendous, because as a sexual assault survivor, you don't trust anybody. And in equine therapy, you have to trust your horse, and that horse trusts you, and you have this back and forth with this animal, you know, and it helps you to trust others in that sense. And so that really helped me. But ultimately, theater is what helped me. And, you know, in the beginning, when I wasn't fully ready to start receiving healing and support, theater was my form of escapism. I put on even additional layers of masks than I already put on myself, right? I got to play somebody else for a few hours, and that felt great because I didn't have to be me.
So you had a combination of, I really like what you're speaking to. I mean, you had some key points, and then in terms of, you said quiet moments that you had. I wrote quiet moments is when you have the most noise. Mm-hmm. And I want people to kind of get that, is that the quiet moments where, as you're saying, part of the masking is that we put on these masks, we jump into our careers, we stay busy, we do these kind of different things. But then I heard you say in the quiet moments, when we are alone with ourselves, is when the most noise comes. And that's, you know, that's so powerful, because I think sometimes when we are escaping, we're escaping to a place. But I think, as Eric speaks to, isolation can be a dangerous place, because that's when the most noise can come. And then you also mentioned about not necessarily being ready. And I think that's really important, that as we talk about this work, because the stages of readiness is different for each individual. So to your point, Sandra, like what works for one person in terms of being integrated in group, because I do group work, but as clinicians and if people are in this space and trying to help, we have to be mindful of the uniqueness of what Sandra needs compared to what the next sexual assault victim need, and not just make these blanket recommendations and take more of an assessment of the individual. So thank you for that. And then I also just to conclude, and Lyman, Dr. Lyman, I'd like you to, speak to your, what helped you as well by saying that also Sandra mentioned about theater and acting and how she went through the professional aspects of therapies and arts and different kind of things to get help, but then had that over there that was actually contributing to putting on more mask. And so I only want to highlight that to say that, Sandra, you really, for me, shared the importance of looking at different avenues and not being trapped into one, whether it be professional or in your personal life, but to take a collective look at what you're doing on your journey. So that's my takeaway from you. I hope I didn't take the wrong things, but thank you, because it was powerful for me and what you shared. So Dr. Lyman, same question. What kind of work have you done on your journey towards healing?
Yeah, let me begin by saying, great question. Thank you, Sandra. You are my sister. When you were talking, I could just relate to everything you were saying by diving into, that's why I talk about 7 masks. I just dove into work, dove into academics, and just started putting on more masks. But the healing came, for me, it was a spiritual journey. At my church, they created a men's counseling group. And because my pastor saw a need, his wife is a clinician, and she was like, we have these groups for women. We need to have some groups for men. But you can't tell me all these men in this church aren't going through something. Thank goodness the pastor listened, and we created a Top Gun men's group. And what helped me was to listen to men from 19 all the way up to 80 years old talk about their trauma. And I felt for the first time I was not alone. And that began the process, to what Eric was talking about, of beginning to say, wow, so I don't have to walk around concealing who I am. I don't have to be conflicted. I don't have to feel condemned. And then there was this one Bible verse that I live by, St. Luke chapter 17, verse 14, that says, and they were healed as they went. And that let me know that healing is a journey, is a process. And that has been what keeps me whole. That is the message that I carry to the world, that I will carry to India, that I will carry to Turkey, is that it is a process of healing. You are healed as you go, not as you stay. And sometimes I think what trauma does, it wants you to stay in the trauma. But the key word is they were healed as they went. And so every day is that one thing. What's the one thing you can do to get you not away from, because it's forever is going to be there, but that you learn how to coexist with it, that it becomes infused in your story and it's a part of your DNA. Yeah. And I believe that God has a way to allow us to go through trauma, to go through adversity, as grandma would say, trials and tribulation, so that we see another person on that road, that we could say, we could be that good Samaritan and pour in the oil and the ointment and help them along the way. And then, as Dr. King said, my living will not be in vain.
Yes, there we go. You all are, everyone's watching. I'm hoping you're being fed like I am. The panelists are giving us some heart and soul here. Takeaway for me is it's a process. And it's not an outcome, because I think healing is not a destination, it's a journey, it's a process. And we want to be mindful of that, is that as we're in this space doing this work, we don't develop treatment plans with the goal to say that once you hit this mark, you're done. There's no such thing. As Dr. Lyman explained, I believe it's a process, and it's a mindful process.
Yes.
It keeps us moving towards healing. So again, I would like to transition with the third question, and I'll lead with Matthew. And then, in the sake of time, I would like you all to share some of your, final thoughts, what you would want, people to take away from this very dynamic conversation. I like to throw a couple of quotes in there. One of my quotes that I like to use really quick is just to share with you all. Now, ask the question, start with Matt, is I teach a lot of resiliency. I do a lot of resiliency work. And one of the quotes I use is resilient people find solution in problems. In contrast, troubled people find problems in every solution. So that's my personal quote. And I teach that when you become resilient, you look for solutions. When you're troubled, you look for problems. So I believe that when we go through our experiences with trauma, is that your mindset determines the course of the healing. And so are you a solution-focused kind of person, or are you dwelling in your trauma? That's one quote that I use to kind of inspire. The other thing that I would say, and I'm going to ask the question after this, is sometimes trauma chooses us at the worst time, but we are responsible for how we choose to cope with our trauma. Matt, what were your thoughts about that quote? Is that chooses us. Again, we don't always choose to be victims, but we are responsible for how we cope with our trauma. If you can speak to that, and then just quickly, what would you want anyone who's watching to take away from this power conversation and the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks for the quotes and the question. My thought would be is of course we don't choose this. And I think that's so very important for us to remember as we're having conversations. For 1 in 6, specifically with male survivors, is there's so much blame within the survivor community of what did I do? What did I wear? How could I have changed this? How could I have stopped it? What should I have done differently? And so I think it's so very powerful to remember that we didn't choose this. I had this beautiful moment just a few weeks ago in Indiana as I sat with a survivor. 1in6.org is home to the Bristlecone Project, which is 158, I think now, unique survivor stories from male survivors, including both video and written stories. And we're interviewing the survivor whose story was just horrific. He had been asked to share his story with another organization who later chose not to share it. And it was devastating for him. And as I was listening to him share his story with all the filming equipment around us, it stuck with me that no one had ever told him this was not your fault. And that they believed what he was saying, his experience. And so I think it's so very important to remember we didn't choose this. And no matter what society tells you, we are here. We do believe you. We do love you. We do support you. This is not your fault. It's not something that you chose. And the takeaway that I would really hope that everyone would leave with today is that it's okay not to be okay. And for me, I started this journey when I was young. I began my work in this field when I was 18 years old. And I think I feel this weight, this expectation to be okay all the time, right? Because I'm the guy who comes and walks on stage with Anthony Edwards and we talk about survivorship and we share resources for working with male survivors, but I'm not always okay. And it's okay not to be okay. And so I have to remind myself that I pick up the mask and put it back on from time to time. I have to remind myself that my experience informs how I interact with my family, with my friends, with my community, my relationship with my wife, my marriage. And so I have to remember, I have to tell myself it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to need resources and help myself. And so if that's the one biggest takeaway is that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to need help.
Thank you for that. I'm smiling on the inside. I actually do a training entitled that "It's Okay Not to Be Okay." It's that message. You're inside of my heart with that. I thank you, Eric. What would be your takeaway? Any thoughts about the quotes, and what would you want people to take away? We're going to have the production coming up soon. What's your message to the world and takeaway?
Well, I gotta thank Matt. There's a line in the film. It's Dr. Amit Etkin out of Stanford University and Alta Neuroscience. And he's one of the foremost researchers into PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And he finds markers that indicate the best therapy, and he does these samplings in tens of thousands. He's absolutely brilliant. And he has this line in the film where it says a lot of people try to figure out why the trauma happened to them, and there's no why, and there's this huge pause, and he says it just did. And I'm like, is that a little harsh? And I'm like, or is that? And now that Matt brought that up, it's staying in because it's a powerful moment. It just did.
Yeah.
You know, and it's what we do with it. And so, you know, so the takeaway for me, it's a daily thing. For me, I have to work on my spiritual condition starting every morning when I wake up. Nothing, I don't have a lot of carryover from yesterday. And fortunately, I don't have a lot of detriment coming at me from the future. The time is now, and I have to work on my spiritual condition on a daily basis in my personal recovery. And so when I wake up, it's kind of like the bank is zeroed out. And what am I going to do? You know, what am I going to do to take care of my recovery today? And I'm finding out the most successful, I guess successful is a poor word, but the people that are thriving and healing are the people that also have a very similar mindset. What am I going to do today? What am I going to work on? What am I doing today? And it's an acceptance that it's a lifetime work. Much like if you were diagnosed with diabetes and you have to have your insulin, we have a situation with trauma or with drugs and alcohol for me that I'm going to have to work on daily for the rest of my life. And you know what? I've integrated it as part of my narrative and part of my working life.
Wow.
It's actually a plus because it's forced me into a spiritual lifestyle. And I can tell you my wife and family benefit from that.
Yes.
Because I put my recovery and God first. Yes. And my spiritual fitness, but it's a day by day thing. And I have to build it up every day. Then I go to bed at night, and the next morning I have to work on it again. And I find out it's very similar for all the people in recovery. Yes. And it's not a bad thing.
Yes.
It's something that has occurred to that's happened to us that is actually a gift that puts us into a place where we can function a little bit differently. Yes. And we get what I would call a big gift. So anyways, that's my last thought.
It's okay not to be okay. And then Eric says it's a daily. And it's not even bad that it happens daily, because you can take the adversity and turn it into a positive and use that to build your spiritual, physical well-being and all of that. So these takeaways are just as powerful as the experience. It's a daily thing, and it's not bad because other people can benefit from the work that you're doing on yourself, as Eric said, your family, your friends. You all are, this is so good. Trauma is what happens to you. It does not define you, right? Trauma is what happens to you. It does not define you, is what I like to share. Sandra, your takeaway, ma'am, please share with us.
Oh, I wrote that down, exactly what you just said. That's what one of the things I was going to say. Yes, trauma, it does not define you. And I for a long time, I thought it did. I had to learn that that's not the case. Also, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. No matter, for me, I kept telling myself it's my fault. What could I have done differently? But it is not your fault. Also, I have now learned to live with this monster, which I call my traumas, my monster. If you have somebody like, say, a big linebacker, huge, bigger than me, I'm 5'2" and little, coming at you and you keep trying to push it away, it's not going away. You're not going to be able to push it away. But once you are able to live next to, side by side, and know that it's going to go along with you down the road, then there's nothing to push away anymore, right? Yes. But it's still there, and you know that it's still there.
Whoa, you're dropping nuggets. Whoa, Sandra. Whoa.
Also, being a lifelong journey. Yeah, there's no end to healing. I'm always going to be healing. And in unmasking all my masks, I will never be who I was. And that's okay. Because along this journey of traumas and things that I've learned, you've grown, and you probably don't want to be that person that you were before, because who you are now and what you've learned, experienced, networking, people you've met, you're going to come out in the end a better person for it. And there's a quote that I'd like to say. It's from Young Pueblo. He is an author. It is not about being fully healed and then starting your life. It is about embracing healing as a lifelong journey while allowing genuine connections to organically emerge along the way. And I truly feel that that's happened. I mean, you know, meeting Eric, meeting you, Dr. Wayne, meeting you, Dr. Lyman, and Matt, you know, I will have these lifelong connections and bonding experiences.
Wow.
To travel with me.
Yeah, you got me fooled. I think everyone's smiling on the inside and out. I mean, you just said a mouthful. My heart, my face, everything is, you know, embracing everything you said. I'm looking at the reactions of, you know, Dr. Lyman and Matt and Eric, and I'm pretty sure if I could see the faces of those who are listening, they would be smiling and full on the inside for what you said. So powerful. Really, it's okay to have this be on the side of me. I'm tired of pushing. So I even accepted the ideal. This is going to be part of my journey on the side of me. And it's okay, because in my trauma, I've created some new pathways and connected with some new people that can inspire me to be better than what I was. What a message that people need to hear. I have one t-shirt, I have many t-shirts, but one that I teach and I sell is you bounce back, I bounce forward. See, I don't teach resiliency from a place of, if you've had trauma and you bounce back to the broken place, you're no better than where you were when you were started. But you bounce back, I bounce forward. That's my quote. I teach people that. And what you just discussed, Sandra, about bouncing forward, taking these experiences and understanding how they made you a better person. So thank you, Dr. Lyman. What do you have to share your takeaway with everyone that's listening?
Wow, there's not much I can add. I just say this, that trauma as well as healing is a quilt, is not a blanket. There's not a one size fit all. There are pieces of our life experiences that becomes a patch in that quilt of healing. And each of us have a patch that goes into this quilt called healing, that when we put it around us, it gives us comfort, it gives us warmth. So understand that the healing process is made up of many pieces, many experiences that makes it a quilt and not a blanket. And I think too long, we've been trying to apply a blanket. And that's what Sandra was talking about, one size fit all, when really it's a quilt made up of many pieces. They don't match, they don't fit, but that's okay, because they're stitched together with the words of hope and freedom. That's all I got for you.
That's all you got for me? That's a mouthful. It is powerful. That, you know, that is a lot. I would ask Eric, anyone has any last thoughts or comments, and we'll you know, have some final thoughts, I think, by giving out. Any other last thoughts or comments you want to share? Anyone? This has been really good. For those who are watching, I would just like to say to you, as we're talking about sexual assault and everyone has shared their story, I'd like to say to you that the quality of your mental health highlights your priorities in life. So I'm going to repeat that. The quality of your mental health highlights the priorities in your life. And I only say that to say that make getting help a priority. You know, again, I think the takeaway is that when you've been hurt, every one of these panelists has spoken to you and said, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to get help. And just know what Sandra said, you'll be okay. Those are my words. I'm paraphrasing. You'll be okay. You'll get through this. And Eric did what he's doing with the production, because he's wanting the world to know and to hear the voices of those who may not have a voice. So thanks for having me.
I'd like to just, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just really feel moved. I just want to say one thing is, if there's any men out there that have heard this and it's kind of activated them a little bit. Some memories have come up, something's come up. Please go to the 1in6.org website. They have tons of resources and you can start your journey today. And I just feel that there might be somebody listening to this that needs to hear that. And I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just felt moved to say that. So there's some amazing resources there, and it could be the start of a journey of healing. So didn't mean to interrupt, but I felt it important. Thank you.
Eric, you can interrupt anytime because we always have to do a call to healing, right? So thank you for interrupting and sharing that to let them know where they can go as we open up potentially to your point to where people may need to have a way to reach out. So thank you. Interrupt with any of that delivery anytime. Any thoughts from anyone else? If not, Nikki, is there some?
Yes. On behalf of Given Hour, I just want to say thank you to all of you who participated today. You panelists, you guys are amazing. You shared honest and open conversation, and that's not easy to share those personal experiences. But today, you served as an inspiration to many that were listening and to many that will listen to this webinar after. So thank you so much for being open and honest and for your time. And then I want to say a special thank you to you, Dr. Buckingham, for moderating today's conversation. It was very powerful and you did an amazing job. We're so thankful to have you. And then for Eric, just making this film and bringing this group of people together. We know that sharing stories changes lives, and that we're hopeful that today's conversation and the film, once it's released in October, will encourage others to join the movement to unmask their hope. So I just want to switch gears real quick and talk about what Given Hour is doing in May. So for those of you that are listening, May is hosting a Find the One challenge. Given Hour is hosting a Find the One challenge in the month of May, and we'll also be doing another webinar on May 10th. That we would love for you guys to join into, log on, register. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern on the 10th. And so you can learn more. I posted some things in the chat where you can learn about our Find the One challenge and register for that webinar and come back for another wonderful conversation. So again, thank you all the participants out there, and also you panelists for today's discussion. We truly appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Goodbye.
to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.